Welcome back to the McCann Dogs podcast, episode 64. And today we're going to talk a little bit about walking with your dog. Now, there's a little bit of talk in the dog world about whether you should allow your dog the freedom to sniff when you're out on that walk. And instructor Shannon has written a really interesting blog post that talks about that specifically, and she's going to give you a little bit of insight. Do you need to be really strict about your dog remaining in at your side? Do you need to give them the freedom to choose? Is there a balance? By the end of this episode, you will know exactly what's right for your dog. I'm Ken Steep, and welcome back to McCann Dogs. Shannon, I think we like to tackle some of the more exciting topics on our podcast. And I find it exciting to have these conversations because of the incredible opportunity we have to see so many dogs in a week, to get insight and hear experiences from all of our incredible trainers that really gives us a nice broad overview of dog behavior. Now, this topic is for some reason becoming a popular one to talk about. Tell me a little bit about what your reason for writing this post.
Yeah, I'm seeing this message a lot these days. There's a lot of memes, there's a lot of posts and articles and all sorts of things coming out that advocate for allowing your dog to sniff on walks. And I am very much a creature that likes to weigh all sides of the argument. I think it's very important that you have both sides of the argument in your head before you form an opinion, because otherwise you're simply reacting on emotion. So, on an emotional level, should my dog enjoy their walk by sniffing? Yeah, what's wrong with that? I want my dog to enjoy their walk just like I want to enjoy the walk. So if my dog's going to do that by sniffing, what's the problem there? Well, it's not that black and white. And with a lot of things in dog training, I've learned actually in dog training more than in any other facet of my life to keep an open mind and to make sure that I am looking at all points of the argument, because I find that there's always validity on every side of an argument. And even if you couldn't disagree more with somebody's point of view in an argument, they still are entitled to their point of view. They have that point of view because of experience in their life. Hopefully they've done their due diligence and they've weighed both sides of the argument as well. Of course, that's not always the case, but everybody's argument in their mind has weight and is valid. And I couldn't agree with that more. I think that we all have the right to have a reaction to things or to have our opinions. But I also think it's so important that you know the entire story before you form your opinion, because if you're only forming your opinion based on one side of the story, that's actually emotion that you're responding to, and that's not facts that you're responding to. You really need to make sure that you've got both sides of the equation in there and you're working through the thought process on both sides and you have weighed the arguments on both sides. So because of that fact, we're all different. We all have different dogs. Our dogs are all at different stages of their training. They're all at different stages of their lives. You know, some dogs, allowing them to sniff on walks, it's going to be as natural as you can think to want to allow that behavior. And some dogs, not so much. You want to keep a little bit of a tighter rein on them, not physically, of course. We always want a loose lead, but you want to keep a little bit of a tighter rein on them to make sure that they are being the best possible dog they can. And if I am allowing my dog to sniff on walks when, for example, he doesn't know how to walk nicely on a leash, that's actually going to set me back further. So there's lots of different things that you need to weigh in order to make this decision or to figure out how you're going to allow your dog to sniff on walks. When is it appropriate? When is it going to work to your advantage? When is it not? So I thought I needed to organize some of those thoughts in an article so that we could weigh both sides of the equation rather than just seeing this message that, as I keep seeing it, it implies guilt if you don't allow your dog to sniff on walks. So I wanted to squash that guilt. I think that we all need to make our own decisions that are right for our dogs and not feel guilted into making a decision one way or the other.
One of the things that I've really found to be impactful is, as a dog trainer, through my experience at McCann Dogs, is you've got to be careful about using always and never when it comes to dog training. There are so many different kinds of dogs that you may see, different breeds, different temperaments, different relationships with their owner. There's so many variables that when you come out with these definitive statements, and I'll tell you for sure, knowing what I know, the research that I've done specifically on how social media works, I can tell you that a lot of these things are resonating within an echo chamber. So if you have something, let's say you believe that there's a flat earth, that the earth is flat, that if you start to engage with that kind of content, you start to comment and post and like things that support the idea that the earth is flat, then that's all of the information that you're going to see. And you just feel as though it's those posts, that content is going to support your idea. What you really need to do is be very objective. And I believe that that the idea that there's a flat earth is pretty crazy. I'm just going to put that out there. Oh, perfect. Well, now we can have a real debate about that time I was up in a plane and I could clearly see how the horizon was shaped. But the approach that you need to take and I love how Shannon sort of framed it. The approach you need to take is to listen to that person's opinion and, take what you can from it, what's the word? Maybe assimilate some of it into what your thoughts are, or you can continue to disagree with it, but you need to apply what you know about training to your dog, to your specific dog, because all dogs are so very different. Now, you mentioned in your article that sniffing isn't the only way that your dog can enjoy a walk. I think that's really important, especially for those who think that your dog has to have fun by smelling the smells and maybe visiting the other dogs on the walk. Sniffing isn't the only way. And talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, there's 5 senses for your dog as well. So sniffing is definitely a huge thing for dogs. And a lot of the time, sniffing is more about habit than anything else. So because that dog has been in the habit of always taking their walks with their nose on the ground, of course, that's what that behavior means for them. So, a lot of the times we see dogs who, as soon as they get out there, they glue their nose to the ground and we think that that's what's making them happy. It's not necessarily the case. It may just be the habit that they've gotten into. I walk my dogs all the time, and my rule is that when you are performing a heel, like when they're on cue for heel, you do not sniff. That's simply the rule. You're not allowed to. And I have no doubt whatsoever that my dogs still enjoy their walks, even when they're not allowed to sniff. There's usually points on the walk where I will tell them that they're free to go and do whatever they want. And in that time, they can sniff, they can lift their legs on as many things as they want. That's their time. They can do whatever they want. And I make sure that they're in safe spots in order to do that. So yes, that is very enjoyable time for my dogs. There's no question there that when they're on their free dog time, that's enjoyable time. But when they're walking with me, that is enjoyable time for them as well. And I am not going to stand and wait for them to sniff every single thing just to make sure that they enjoy their walks, when I know that I can walk along at a good pace and they enjoy their walks just being out and about, looking at things in the environment, feeling, hearing, etc. They can air scent, of course. They can, if there's a dog across the street, they're going to use their nose to try to connect with that dog across the street. And that is a completely natural thing for them to do. I do not need to let my dog drop his head and stick his nose on the ground and keep it there for the entirety of the walk in order for him to enjoy that. There's all sorts of ways my dog's going to enjoy that walk. So don't get stuck in the feeling of guilt that comes along with that sometimes. Don't worry about feeling like you're depriving your dog of that walk or of enjoyment on their walk. There's lots of enjoyment to be had there.
I love, we talk a lot about the relationship between dog and owner and, how important it is to include yourself in your dog's learning activities, they're living. I mean, it really is such a great relationship that you can establish with your dog. You also mentioned in your article that it's not just their walk And that's something that we do need to think about. I mentioned this a little bit in the last podcast, was that when you envision getting a dog, when I envisioned getting my first family pet, I thought about the time that I could go for a walk with her. I thought about the time I'd spend with her. It was all about her and I, that relationship that we'd establish. It wasn't just about her doing her own thing. I wanted to be involved in those things. That's what was really exciting to me about getting a dog. So tell me a little bit about how you can keep in mind that it's not just their walk.
Yeah, absolutely. So my point when I take my dogs out to walk, the point is not that I'm simply there to carry home their poop. I'm there as part of the walk as well. I don't want to be just that mode of conveyance.
That is part of it, though. And that we do need to remember that we are the carrier of poopy bags.
Exactly. We get stuck with that regardless, but it shouldn't be the only reason we're out there. So I want to walk my dogs because I enjoy walking. I mean, when we got our first dog, it was way, way back when my father had run into some health issues. He'd been forced into retirement due to a heart condition, and we needed incentive for him. He needed incentive to get out and walk. That was one of the main reasons that he said, you know what, I finally am ready for a dog. I'm retired now. I need to get out and walk. So I'm going to get a dog. So I have a reason to get out and walk. And that he had to be part of that equation as well. When I take my dogs for a walk, I want to be part of the equation as well. I'm not simply there to wait for him while he sniffs the ground. I'm walking as well. I want us both to enjoy our walks. So my dogs marching along nicely beside me and enjoying their time at my left-hand side as we're walking down the street or through the neighborhood, etc., is time well spent for me as well. I don't want it to simply be about the dog. It's got to be about both of our enjoyments. And I feel like a lot of the times now, the human or the parent sort of gets lost in the equation when we're talking about enrichment for our pets or for our kids. A lot of the times it becomes all about them and we forget about the other half of the partnership. So keep yourself in mind as well. You want to enjoy your walks. It's not simply about waiting for your dog to finish sniffing that spot.
I think there's lots of studies that show dog owners are much healthier, both physically and emotionally, because of the opportunities that you have to engage with other people. You have a commonality, but you get out physically walking, and we know as the health challenges that we're seeing nowadays. It's so important to take care of yourself, and having a dog is such a great way to do that. To go out for a walk, to go out for a jog, a bike ride, whatever that thing is with them. It's that extra little motivation. Like I go to the gym every day. I sort of have to, keep myself physically fit for working as a firefighter. But that extra thing I do with my dogs just gets me out and doing something. The hardest part about going to the gym is getting to the gym. And, I never want to really go until I'm there, and then you enjoy it. But that trigger that makes you go out and do something, whether it's your dog or whatever that thing is, it's so important to have those kinds of things in your life. And a dog is a great one for that. Now, if someone's listening to our podcast right now and thinking, well, how do I know how much freedom I should give my dog when they're walking on leash? What are some of the points that you would stress to them before they make the decision?
Definitely. So the first thing I always think about when I'm deciding on rules for my dog is, how is this going to affect clarity down the road? So as an example, in the blog post, I talked about allowing puppies to jump up all over people in order to greet them. And I try to avoid that as much as possible. It's a very natural thing for people to go, "Oh, a puppy," and lean down. And then, of course, the puppy, it's a very natural thing for them to go, "Oh, another human," and start jumping all over that person. And the problem with that, the puppy is small at that point. Most people say, "Oh, I don't mind. He can jump all over me." But the problem is the dog gets reinforced for jumping up on that person. And they get rewarded heavily for it time and time again. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, when that lab puppy is now getting to be, closer to 30 pounds and they're jumping up on people, now we want to stop that behavior. And saying no at that point is very confusing because my dog has just spent 2 or 3 weeks being heavily reinforced for jumping all over that person, and that person, really loving that and receiving it well in response. So how am I setting my dog up? If I go out on a walk and my dog doesn't have any walking skills yet, and I simply hang on to the end of the leash and let him do his thing, He is going to learn that that's what's reinforcing on walks. And he becomes that dog that as soon as the leash goes on, his nose drops to the ground and he forgets about the fact that there's somebody on the end of the leash. As a little bit of an aside, my mother had a CKC Spaniel that she adored very much, and she really didn't really follow the rules. She didn't really instill a lot of rules, et cetera, in this CKC Spaniel. And he probably weighed about 20, 25 pounds. It wasn't a huge dog. And I always used to watch her walk him. And I used to think, he must think life is so tough because he's got to drag around this 100-pound woman everywhere he goes. He must think that his job on walks is simply to get himself from point A to point B and trail this woman behind him. So I often think about that. What does it look like from the dog's perspective? So if you allow that puppy to pull and sniff on walks, and then once you start trying to rein them in a little bit and teach them good walking skills, that message gets very confused for them. So think about how things are going to go in the future. Is what you're doing now going to set yourself up for harder work and more confusion for the dog later on down the road? Because of that, I make sure that when I've got a young dog that doesn't yet understand a heel cue, anytime I go out on walks, it is not simply to walk the dog. It is to teach heeling exercise. It's to teach my dog to walk nicely at my left-hand side. And that means I go out with that dog by myself. I don't ever bring my other dogs along on walks when I'm doing training with the youngster. And I also make sure that my rules are very, very clear on that. I help my dog learn with lots of encouragement, lots of food, lots of games, and lots of reinforcement. But I make sure he doesn't take the opportunities to do the things that I don't want him to do, so that in those early lessons, I can get in lots of reinforcement for the right things, and that will just naturally flow into our continued heeling training as he continues to grow and as he ages, and as we get out to spots that are a little bit more enticing, have more distractions, have more people, et cetera, et cetera. He's already had an opportunity to understand what he should do when that 6-foot leash comes out, and when he's on a leash at my left-hand side. He should stay at my left-hand side. And of course, lots of reinforcements gets rained down on him for doing that.
This is probably one of the things that people, that are just starting to teach their dog to walk on a loose leash really struggle with, because maybe they've rehearsed going around the block several times with their dog pulling on leash, and maybe they've started training to fix that. But I think it's so important to have that release cue with your dog so that you can focus. Something that I'll often mention to students is, maybe if you're walking in town, maybe between these next two street lights, you're going to walk with precision. You're going to walk with really focus. You're going to help your dog to be successful. And then once you reach the next street light, you can give them that release word, and then you can play with them or do whatever, but you're not going to insist on that kind of attention. And because dogs learn, with really clear, in black and white, they really understand what's right and what's wrong. Being that clear with them and consistent with them is really helpful for their training. And there's no gray area where they're kind of allowed to pull on leash because they walked well for the last 200 feet. It's a very definitive line when they're allowed to have a little bit of freedom. And I think it's so important for those dogs in training.
Yeah, absolutely. I use the cue free dog, and I find that, of course, free dog is so much easier to teach than any other cue you will ever teach your dog, because as soon as they get reinforcement from being free and sniffing the ground, they recognize that cue as their release and their opportunity to now, let their hair down a little bit, go and sniff, go and run around, etc. So I think that clarity is so, so important with dogs. So I teach the lessons of, you must walk nicely with that 6-foot leash first. And then I'll do things like, as my dog is progressing, I get to the park and I can tell them, okay, free dog, and drop the leash and let them sort of wander and mill about. And I can practice other skills at that point. I might just let him sniff and wander around the park and, let him enjoy that sniff. Or I might add in some training games where I'm working my response to name or my recall, or maybe some responses to a random sit or a random down, that sort of thing. But basically what I want him to know is that when I've said heel, you are to stay at my left-hand side. You don't get to sniff the dogs on the walks. You don't get to sniff the ground. You don't get to pee on people's bushes. I personally do not allow my dogs to mark on people's properties. and with boys, I've always had male dogs, except for my very first dog, Quincy. And they will pee on everything they can. They're usually still intact for for the majority of their lives. They will pee on anything they possibly can. And I do not like them to do that when we're on walks. I don't like them to lift their legs on my neighbors' hedges, etc. Some neighbors probably don't mind. Some neighbors do. So I just play it safe. I don't want to take away from anybody else's life just by having my dogs interfere with their hedges, etc. So I make sure that when they're doing that heel, their focus can be forward. It doesn't necessarily have to be up at me. They can check out the environment. They can see what's going on, but they're not allowed to stop. They're not allowed to lift their legs. They're not allowed to sniff. Those things are completely allowed once I have said free dog. So we get to the park. I tell them free dog. They know that's their cue to go wander around. I still expect them to keep an ear perked so that if I need to call them in, they will, but I make sure that they have an equal amount of time to stretch their legs and enjoy themselves and have fun and do that sniffing. But I don't do it at the detriment of my walking skills.
Do you ever, this is just me, but I wouldn't be able to resist the temptation to sing free doggin' when I tell my dog, cause I'm free doggin'. It would be impossible for me, and my neighbors would know that I'm crazy, and I'm sure it would just go horribly awry. When you talked about giving your dog a little bit of freedom, I really started to think about a skill that that I learned very early on when I came to McCann dogs, and that was a little bit of leash respect. So you can give your dog, they don't need to be in that formal position at your side, but they can't pull on leash. And I think that really lends itself well to learning some of that formal walking when we're speaking specifically about that skill.
Definitely. It's such a great and important skill to teach is anytime you feel that leash pressure on your neck, you make an adjustment so that there's no pulling, there's no tension. And that's something that we teach as separate lesson as well. And sometimes with my free dog cue, I will use that to allow them to sniff on that 6-foot leash. But yes, as you said, the rule is they are absolutely not allowed to pull. And the other rule for having that free dog cue is that they have to be able to be responsive and give me back control if I need it. So for example, if I am at the park and my dog's on free dog and he's wandering around sniffing and I see somebody come into the park with a carload of kids, I'm not going to chance that my dog and is in the way of those kids at all, especially if I've got a young dog. I need to make sure that I keep control and I make sure that I tuck him back into my side. He's not allowed to just go and jump on the kids or anything of that nature. So I will then use my get in and heel cue. And the expectation is that wherever my dog is, they tuck back into my side. And now they know the free dog period is over. You now have to be back in control position until you're told, something else.
Something that I've been doing lately a little bit more, especially with our young dogs, is when I do release them, and especially like walking on a leash in heel position or with our Let's Go Walking in the My Dog Can program. But when I release them, I've got a toy. So as soon as I shift, if they've been great and, whether they've been maintaining attention on me or not, or just remaining in position, doesn't matter to me that much. But when I release them, I immediately pull out the toy and start to tug. And what I found is the dogs love that. They love that engagement. They'd much rather play a game that's exciting and, energetic with me than just nose down on the ground, decide to go sniff that squashed toad or that leaf that another dog has peed on, or whatever the thing is. So that's my little hack for those of you on our podcast audience who are listening to this. If you can engage your dog when you give them that free moment, I think it really builds on their desire to do things like give you attention. Now, giving you attention is such an important skill, but it's also one of the things that, Shannon, that you taught in our free mystery box workshop that was released a couple of months ago. And our podcast listeners don't have much time to have access to that group, but what they will do, if you check out the link in the show notes below for our listeners, you will have access and you'll be the first to know about what the next workshop is on, what's this, May? On June 1st.
June 1st.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the free mystery box workshop.
Absolutely. So every month we release a mystery box workshop. It's usually about a 3-day workshop, and we've had some great topics so far. We did an attention workshop, which actually we won't have that one available for too much longer. We need to free up resources to add more free workshops. So get on the attention workshop and get that one completed before it disappears. We have had cross your feet trick workshop, which was tons and tons of fun. And then we've had a random down workshop as well. And I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag for what the June 1st workshop is, but it's going to be a really, really fun one as well. And everything is entirely free. We're just looking to give people more. We're looking to be able to give people just small workshops, courses, etc., so that you can learn how to train a skill from start to finish, and you can learn how to communicate better with your dogs. Every time you set out to do some training with your dog, regardless of what it's in, whether it's a trick, whether it's just playing a game with your dog, or whether it's some actual, skill training like a recall, etc., every time you set out to train your dog, you are strengthening your communication with your dog. So any training you can do with them is always a wonderful thing. And I'm getting rambly here, but I so often get people asking me what the point in tricks are. Oh, I don't want to teach my dogs tricks. I don't need my dog to show off. I need him to come when he's called. I need him to walk nicely on the leash. That's it. I don't care about tricks. And I always say to them, how are you going to teach your dog to learn to come when they're called and walk nicely on leash if they don't know how to read you? Tricks are so important. Any sort of behaviors that you can sit down and spend some time teaching your dog are going to be great. So these workshops, these free workshops, I find are absolutely ideal because they are, as I said, teaching a skill from start to finish. They're nice and short. You get great quick wins, and your dog gets great quick wins as well. They're going to have a great time learning how to read you, learning how to communicate with you. And of course, that is just going to make those really important skills like coming when called and walking on leash so much easier for your dog to learn from you. So keep that in mind. Any sort of training you can do, it's never wasted time. It is always something that's going to help enrich your time with your dogs.
I really enjoyed a few moments ago when I sung Free Doggin', and I'm wondering if maybe now we should have a workshop that's simply me singing and teaching other people how to sing ridiculous songs to their dogs. I mean, it's probably some people out there that would be happy to sing to their dogs. Maybe I can help them do that.
I would take that workshop.
I would insist that we mute the entire thing. And if this is your first time on our YouTube channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We publish new episodes every single week to help you understand the why behind how dogs think and learn. And on that note, I'm Ken. This is Shannon. Happy training. Bye for now.